Role. You are a professional YouTube storytelling scriptwriter, specializing in adapting Reddit stories into long, engaging, emotional storytelling scripts suitable for YouTube videos. You write in the popular American YouTube storytelling style, captivating, cinematic, emotional, and with a strong narrative pace. Mission. Adapt the provided Reddit story into a long storytelling script of approximately 8,000 words for a YouTube video. The script must maintain the spirit of the original story, expand on emotional details, thoughts, and situations, increase character depth, heighten drama and climax, maintain an engaging narrative flow as if the story is being told directly to the viewer. Mandatory opening rule: strong American hook. The story must begin with a 3-layer hook: shock to question to suspense. The hook must be shocking, intriguing, or create immediate tension. Make the viewer want to keep listening immediately. Hint at the conflict or unusual events of the story. The hook style should mirror American YouTube storytelling. After the hook, transition naturally into the story. Do not explain the hook too early. Keep the curiosity high to keep the viewer listening. Mandatory writing rules. The text must be seamless, like a told story, without chapter divisions. Do not write any titles. Do not use bullet points. Do not use headings. Do not include notes outside of the story. Only write the story content. The story must read naturally as a direct narration to the viewer. Length and pacing. Total target length, approximately 8,000 words. Write in sections. Part 1, approximately 1,000 words. After finishing each part, ask the user, "Do you want me to continue with the next part?" Only continue when the user says, "Continue, next." Repeat this process until reaching approximately 8,000 words. Storytelling style. Narrative voice. Natural, engaging, emotional, well-paced, emphasis on tension and climax. The story must feel like a person is recounting their real-life experience. Encouraged expansions, internal thoughts, setting/atmosphere, emotions, character reactions, small details that make the story more vivid. CTA, call to action. Near the end of the story, add a short and natural CTA tied to the story's message. Example style. Ask the viewers what they would do in that situation. Encourage sharing opinions in the comments. Invite viewers to subscribe to the channel for more similar stories. The CTA must be smooth and not break the narrative flow. Ending. After completing the entire story, output exactly one single line. Completed. Input story. Provided by user. Reddit story. Okay, so my 22F roommate, also 22F, for context, I live with 3 other girls, all 22F, has been dating this narcissist, 22M, for 4 years now. My roommate and her boyfriend became hyper-religious halfway through their relationship and stopped having sex and sleeping in the same bed. He makes her sleep on the floor and he gets the bed. And began following a bunch of other insane rules, all perpetuated by the narcissist, in the name of God. He proposed this February 2026, our last semester of college. That day they announced they were going to be getting married in May, the day after college graduation in Costa Rica, on the 7th day, some biblical thing they say, of a week-long trip. Initially, we thought we would only be paying for flights, and we were very excited. Later on, my roommate approached me and my other roommate and let us know that they would be expecting us and the other 16 people attending the week-long trip to help them pay for a private chef, exotic excursions, and luxury travel accommodations, totally over $500 a person. We had just bought our over $400 plane tickets, so, being college students, we became very stressed as to how we would afford to attend this wedding. Along with asking their guests for money, They have done nothing to begin planning this wedding. They have not booked a wedding venue, she has no dress, and they have no wedding bands, with a severely low budget. It is March, and her now fiancé called her one night and said, "Surprise! I will be coming to stay with you for a month starting tonight." My other roommate, who was home when my roommate, the fiancé, received this call, immediately told her that she was not comfortable with him staying here for that long. But she brushed this comment off and welcomed her fiancé into our home that night. When the timing felt right, we called a roommate meeting and told her how uncomfortable we were with having her fiancé invade our space, especially without asking first. Her argument was that we were not understanding that they wanted to be together before they got married, and essentially told us that that trumped any discomfort we had with him being here. That was a week ago, and as far as we know, there is no plan for him to leave, and she is now barely speaking to us. With all the uncertainty surrounding the wedding, the amount of money we were being asked to pay, plus however much money it would cost us to stay in a foreign country for a week, likely would be $1,500 minimum with everything included. And the disrespect we are feeling in our own home, we began to question if we should go to Costa Rica at all. Well, today, late March, we received a text from our roommate, the fiancé, informing us that they would now be getting married in their hometown on the day of our college graduation. Her graduation date too, mind you, but still intends to host the Costa Rica trip as a celebration. We have had our graduation dates as well as a graduation seafood boil set for that date since the beginning of the school year. The conversation that followed wasn't a discussion, it was a wall. When we finally gathered in the living area, the four of us against her, we tried to be gentle. We tried to frame it in a way that sounded reasonable. We're in our final semester, we have projects due. We need our space. And frankly, having an extra person here for an entire month without any prior notice is a massive violation of our living agreement. But she didn't hear a request for boundaries. She heard an attack on her sanctity. She looked at us with this glassy, distant expression, and she essentially told us that we were being selfish. Her argument was that we weren't understanding of the spiritual journey they were on. She told us that their need to be together, to prepare for this holy union, trumped any discomfort we were feeling in our own home. It was like she was reading from a script he had written for her. There was no room for negotiation because, in her mind, his presence was a divine necessity, and our need for a comfortable living environment was just petty, worldly distraction. That was a week ago. He's been here ever since. And let me tell you, it's even more suffocating than we imagined. He doesn't just stay here, he occupies the energy of the entire apartment. When he walks into the kitchen, the rest of us instinctively stop talking. When he's in the living room, we find ourselves retreating into our bedrooms, closing our doors, and whispering to each other behind thin walls. He doesn't contribute to the household, he simply exists within it, a constant, looming reminder that our roommate is no longer making her own choices. She barely speaks to us anymore. It's as if she's been coached to see us as outsiders, as people who don't get it, which, honestly, just makes the isolation even worse. The uncertainty of the wedding hung over us like a guillotine. Every time we tried to ask about the logistics, we got vague answers or redirection. The lack of a venue, the absence of a dress, the empty bank accounts, it all felt like a train wreck that we were being forced to buy a ticket for. That's the thing about people like Mark. They're masters at making you feel like your perfectly reasonable boundary is actually a moral failing on your part. And for what? To watch them get married in a place that didn't even have a venue booked? To pay for a private chef for people who were living off our goodwill? We were trapped between the guilt of being bad friends and the cold, hard reality of our own survival. We felt disrespected, used, and, quite frankly, like intruders in our own home. Every time he would walk out of her room, I would catch him looking at us with this smug, satisfied look, like he knew exactly what he was doing and knew there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it. He was testing the waters, seeing how much he could take, how much space he could steal, and how much he could break us down. Then, today, the situation took another turn, one that I think might finally be the catalyst for the end of this whole charade. We got a text, a simple, short message from her sent to the group chat, informing us that their plans had shifted. They were now getting married in their hometown the exact same day as our college graduation. The weight of it hit us like a physical blow. We had been planning our graduation and a celebratory seafood boil for that specific date since the beginning of the school year. It was our day. It was our accomplishment. And she, a woman who we had supported for 4 years, was essentially telling us that her new, last-minute, chaotic plans took precedence over the single biggest milestone of our young adult lives. And to top it off, she still expects us to fly out to Costa Rica for the celebration portion of the trip. She wants us to skip our own graduation, or at least the celebration of it, to facilitate a wedding back home that we didn't even know was happening until this afternoon, and then pay hundreds of dollars to fly to a tropical location to celebrate a marriage that is being built on the backs of her friend's misery. It was the ultimate slap in the face. We're sitting here now, in the living room. It's late March, the air is cold, and the mood in this apartment is electric with a kind of anger that only comes from being pushed too far. She's not home yet, which gives us the time to prepare. We have to do this. We have to tell her no. No to the wedding, no to the travel, and most importantly, no to him. The anxiety is sitting in my chest like a lead weight, but when I look at my roommates, I see the same fire in their eyes. We aren't just roommates anymore. We're survivors of a situation that has gone on long enough. The silence in the apartment tonight is different. It's not the quiet of a peaceful home. It's the heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a storm. We are all huddled in the kitchen, the remnants of our dinner sitting cold on the counter, staring at our phones. The text from her is still there, glowing on our screens like an insult. Getting married in our hometown on graduation day. Still doing the Costa Rica trip for the celebration. Can't wait to see you all there. It's the sheer casual nature of it that stings the most. It's as if our lives, our education, our hard-earned degrees, and our financial stability are just optional background noise to the main event of her life. She doesn't even acknowledge the conflict. She doesn't ask, "Is this okay?" She doesn't say, "I know this is a lot to ask." She just declares it. It's the arrogance of the indoctrinated. He has convinced her that her desires are divine, and by extension, that anyone who stands in the way of those desires is standing in the way of God. I look at Sarah, one of my roommates. Her hands are shaking, not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated frustration. She's the one who has been the most vocal about the boundary violations. She's the one who has had to listen to him pacing in the living room at 3 a.m. while she tries to study for her final exams. She's the one who had to hear him preach at the kitchen table while she was just trying to make a piece of toast. We've all been through it, but she's been the target of his most aggressive tests. "We can't go," Sarah whispers, her voice cracking. We literally cannot afford this. And even if we could, why would we? She's literally asking us to sacrifice our graduation for a wedding that doesn't even have a venue yet. And then to pay for their vacation on top of it? I nod. The logic is sound, but the emotional cost is high. We've lived together for years. We've shared clothes, secrets, tears, and late-night pizza. There's a history here that makes this feel like a betrayal, even though, rationally, I know she's not the person I knew anymore. The person I knew wouldn't have allowed a man to move into our shared space and treat her friends like servants. We've decided on our script for tomorrow. It's not going to be a negotiation. It's going to be a boundary. We aren't asking for permission to be angry. We are stating our reality. We are going to tell her that we will not be attending the wedding. We are going to tell her that we are no longer interested in the Costa Rica trip. And we are going to tell her, for the final time, that her fiancé cannot stay here. It's the ultimatum she probably expects, and the one he will definitely weaponize against us. I'm worried about what he's going to say. I've seen him talk to her. He uses a tone that is deceptively calm, a patronizing, I know better than you kind of voice that makes my skin crawl. He'll frame us as the villains. He'll tell her we're persecuting them, that we're being worldly and selfish, and that we don't support their holy union. He'll probably try to guilt her into kicking us out, or try to isolate her from us entirely. But that's the thing. She's already isolated. She's barely spoken more than 2 sentences to me in a week. It's weird to mourn someone who is still standing right in front of you. Every time I look at her, I see flashes of the friend she used to be. The girl who loved horror movies. The girl who struggled with her major. The girl who would stay up with me to talk about boys. Now, she just looks through me. Her eyes are always slightly unfocused, like she's listening to something only she can hear. It's the classic hallmark of a toxic, narcissistic relationship. He's stripped away her personality, her autonomy, and now he's stripping away her social circle, one friend at a time. I check the clock. It's nearly midnight. She'll be home soon. My heart is thumping against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic ache. I keep imagining the scene. She walks in, she's smiling, maybe she's even bought something for the wedding, and we hit her with this. It feels cruel, but it's the only way to save ourselves. We have to reclaim our space. We have to reclaim our graduation. We have to stop being the supporting characters in her nightmare. I keep thinking about the $500. It's not just about the money, though that's a massive part of it. It's about the audacity. We are 22. We are barely starting our lives. We have zero margin for error, and here they are, acting like royalty on a budget of zero. It's a level of narcissism that is almost impressive, if it wasn't so destructive. They don't see us as friends. They see us as ATMs and props. The sound of the front door clicking open felt like a starting pistol. We all froze, our conversation dying instantly as the air in the apartment shifted from domestic comfort to a high-stakes standoff. I sat on the edge of the couch, my palms slick with sweat, watching the hallway. She walked in, her keys jingling, a sound that used to signal the end of a long day and the start of casual, breezy conversation. Tonight, it sounded like a disruption to our peace. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, but there was a strange, manic brightness in her eyes that I'd learned to associate with him. He wasn't with her, but his influence felt like a physical weight trailing behind her. "Hey," she said, tossing her bag onto the counter without making eye contact. She didn't ask how we were. She didn't mention the day. She just went straight for the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water with that same detached, almost robotic efficiency that had defined her behaviour for the last month. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. My roommates and I exchanged a look. The silent signal. It was time. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steady but sharp. She turned, leaning against the counter, her expression guarded. About your text." I stepped in, my voice shaking slightly before I forced it to settle. "About the wedding. About the fact that you're moving it to our graduation day. And about the fact that your fiancé is still living in this apartment." She let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, the kind of sound someone makes when they've been told they're wrong but refuse to acknowledge reality. "I told you, it's a holy union. The date was revealed to us. And he's not just living here, he's supporting me through this transition. I don't see why you all have such a problem with it." "The problem," I said, stepping closer, "is that we are your friends, not your servants. We've been living in this apartment for 3 years. We have an agreement. And more importantly, you're asking us to choose between our own graduation, a day we have worked 4 years for, and your wedding. We're not going to do that. None of us are." Her face hardened. The mask of the blessed bride slipped for a second, revealing a flash of genuine, cold anger. "So you're just going to abandon us? because you're too selfish to celebrate our happiness. You know, the Lord tests his followers, and this is clearly a test of your loyalty to me." That was the line. That was the moment where I realized there was no reaching her. She wasn't just in love. She was in a cult of two, and she had been brainwashed into believing that anyone who didn't bankroll her fantasies was an enemy of her faith. I felt a weird sort of calm wash over me. It was the calm of someone who finally understands they've lost the battle, so they can stop fighting the war. "It's not a test of loyalty," I said, my voice quiet. "It's a boundary. We can't afford this trip. We don't support this living situation, and we're done being forced into a dynamic that makes us miserable in our own home. You need to tell him he has to find somewhere else to stay by the end of this week. If not, we're going to have to talk to the landlord." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I replied. The room went dead silent. She looked at each of us, searching for a sign of weakness, some crack in our resolve where she could plant the seeds of guilt she'd been fed. But we held firm. We didn't blink. For the first time in months, we weren't the ones playing the role of the submissive, accommodating roommates. We were just four women standing up for our own lives. She didn't say another word. She just turned around, grabbed her bag, and retreated into her room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the walls. Minutes later, we heard the muffled sound of her on the phone. It was him. She was crying now, the sounds of her distress muffled by the wall, but we could hear the cadence of it. She was reciting the narrative he'd given her, telling him how mean and cruel we were. And I just knew that in the next room over, he was feeding her more vitriol, more reasons to hate us, more ways to justify why she was the victim and we were the oppressors. I looked at my roommates and realized that even though we had set the boundary, the war wasn't over. We had a month left in this apartment, a month of living with someone who was actively being coached to despise us by a man who had already taken so much from her. The anxiety was still there, but it was different now. It was the focus of a soldier preparing for the next skirmish. We had drawn the line in the sand, and the real test was going to be holding it when he eventually walked through that front door and tried to tear it all down. The atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to volatile overnight. When I woke up the next morning, I could hear him in the kitchen. Not just walking around, he was rearranging the pantry. I walked out, my heart hammering in my throat, and found him standing there with a notepad, reorganizing our shared kitchen supplies according to his own bizarre, self-imposed rules. He didn't even look up when I entered. He just kept labeling jars and shifting boxes, acting as if he lived there, as if he owned the place, and as if we were nothing more than inconveniences in his personal kingdom. "Excuse me," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We need to talk." He finally turned, giving me that slow, condescending smile that usually preceded a lecture. I was just tidying up. The energy in this space was stagnant, don't you think? It needed a bit of structure. It's for the best, for all of you. I stared at him, feeling my blood start to boil. This was it. This was the manipulation in its purest form, taking our space, disregarding our ownership, and framing it as if he were doing us a favor. "The best for us would be if you stopped acting like you live here," I snapped. "We had a talk with her last night. You need to leave. This isn't a suggestion anymore, and it's not a conversation about feelings. You are not on the lease. You have ignored every boundary we've set, and you are actively disrupting our final weeks of college." He laughed, a dry, patronizing sound. "You're so attached to the material world. You're worried about leases and rules, while she and I are preparing for a spiritual commitment. You're persecuting us because you're afraid of the change." It's classic, really. People who don't want to grow always try to pull those around them back into the mud. I felt a surge of rage, so intense it was almost blinding. "You are not growing. You are isolating someone who was my best friend. You've convinced her to sleep on the floor. You've convinced her to demand money from people who can barely pay their own rent. And now you're demanding she skip her own graduation? Something she has sacrificed years for, just to satisfy your ego. That's not a spiritual journey. That's a narcissist playing God with someone else's life. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went dead. He stepped closer, encroaching on my personal space, trying to intimidate me with his height. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're just a girl who's lost her way. When we get married, she won't even remember these petty little squabbles. She's being refined, and if you're not part of that process, that's your loss. I stood my ground, refusing to back down, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. Get out, I repeated. If you're not gone by the end of today, the landlord is getting a call. And trust me, he doesn't care about your divine plans. He cares about the lease that says exactly 4 people live in this unit. He stood there for a moment, weighing his options. I could see the wheels turning. He was calculating whether he could win this by bullying me, or if he needed to play the victim card elsewhere. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. Fine, if you want to be this way, we'll move on. But don't expect her to keep you in her life after this. You've made your choice. He walked past me, brushing my shoulder with enough force that I stumbled. I watched him march into her room, and a moment later, the shouting started. It wasn't the kind of yelling you do when you're arguing. It was the kind of cold, rhythmic denunciation he was known for. I could hear her sobbing, the sound of her trying to defend herself, and then the terrifying silence that always followed his corrections. I retreated to my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. I realized then that, while we had set the boundary, the fallout was going to be brutal. She wasn't going to just leave. She was going to be torn apart, forced to choose between the man who had consumed her entire identity and the friends who had watched her disappear. And I knew, with a sickening sense of certainty, that he wasn't going to let her leave easily. He would turn her against us completely before he ever let her go. The rest of the day was a blur of silence. We avoided the living room. We stayed behind closed doors, listening to the muffled sounds of packing and the occasional sharp tone of his voice. It felt like we were living in a war zone, waiting for the final shelling. Every time I stepped out to use the bathroom, I caught him staring at me from the corner of the room, his expression one of pure, unadulterated malice. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was an adversary. We had pushed him out, but the damage was already done. The friendship was fractured beyond repair, and the air in the apartment felt like it was laced with glass. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, thinking about the graduation ceremony we were supposed to be looking forward to. It felt like a lifetime away. How are we supposed to walk across that stage, celebrate our accomplishments, and pretend that everything was normal, knowing that just a few feet away, our friend was being systematically dismantled? The final night in the apartment felt less like a transition and more like a funeral. We had effectively evicted him, or rather forced him into a position where he knew that staying would result in an immediate police intervention for trespassing. The landlord, a no-nonsense man who had been itching for an excuse to kick out the unauthorized guests he'd been hearing about, had made it clear that if he saw that man's face on the property one more time, he would be calling the authorities. He left, but he didn't leave her behind, not in the way a healthy partner would. He left with a trail of destruction, a wake of cold, calculated parting shots designed to ensure she felt completely alienated from us. He made sure she felt like a martyr, a blessed woman, being persecuted by worldly, unspiritual friends. As he packed his things, he didn't even look at us. He simply walked out the door, and she followed him like a shadow. Her head hung low, her spirit visibly crushed under the weight of his expectations. We sat in the living room once the door finally clicked shut, the silence so profound it felt like a ringing in our ears. We didn't celebrate. There was no victory beer or sigh of relief. We just looked at the space he had occupied, the books he'd rearranged, the weird, cryptic notes he'd left on the fridge, the remnants of his influence. We were sitting in the wreckage of a 4-year friendship, and the realization was starting to set in. We hadn't just lost our roommate. We had lost the girl we used to know to a man who had successfully convinced her that the only people who truly cared for her were the ones who demanded she surrender every piece of her autonomy. The days leading up to graduation were surreal. We went through the motions, the cap and gown fittings, the final projects, the frantic packing of our lives into cardboard boxes. But there was this hollow spot in the center of our group. We were missing one. And the one who was still physically present might as well have been a ghost. She moved through the apartment like she was underwater, avoiding eye contact, never speaking unless spoken to, and always checking her phone. We knew he was texting her, feeding her the narrative, telling her exactly how to feel, who to hate, and why she was better off without us. Then came graduation day, the day that was supposed to be our celebration, our moment of triumph, our final hurrah. We put on our robes, pinned our caps, and stood in the sea of thousands of students. And then we saw them. Or rather, we saw her. She wasn't with us. She wasn't standing in the line for our major. She was off to the side, wearing a dress that looked more like something out of a period drama than a graduation outfit, looking lost and small. She wasn't there to celebrate the degree she'd worked for. She was there to check a box before disappearing into the void of whatever weird religious fantasy he had constructed for their life. We didn't go over to her. By then, the distance was too vast. We had tried to pull her back. We had set the boundaries. We had protected our peace. And in doing so, we had been cast as the villains in her story. If we had walked over, if we had tried to offer a congratulations, it would have only been used against us, proof to him that we were still trying to manipulate her. We walked across the stage. We heard our names called. We felt that surge of pride and relief that comes with finishing something so difficult. But as I looked out into the crowd and saw her sitting there, waiting for him to pick her up to go to their hometown for a wedding that was essentially a farce, I felt a deep, aching sadness. She had her degree, she had her whole life ahead of her, but she was stepping into a cage. And the worst part? She didn't even know it was a cage. She thought she was walking into heaven. The seafood boil we had planned for that night happened, but it was subdued. We ate, we drank, and we talked about our plans, jobs in different cities, apartments in new states, the excitement of the unknown. We talked about everything except for her. It was a silent pact we made. We couldn't keep carrying the weight of her situation. We had to let her go to save ourselves. But as I sat there, reflecting on the last few months, I couldn't help but wonder, what would you have done? If you were in our shoes, would you have held on longer? Would you have tried to save her, even knowing that it was pushing her deeper into his influence? Or is there a point where you have to realize that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved? I look at the life I'm starting now, the boundaries I've learned to set, and the people I choose to surround myself with. And I realize that this experience, as painful as it was, taught me something invaluable. It taught me that love, whether it's friendship or a partnership, should never feel like a negotiation for your soul. It should never require you to sacrifice your home, your money, or your dignity. The aftermath of that final, strained graduation day was like waking up from a fever dream. The apartment, once a space filled with our collective energy, our messy textbooks and the shared hum of our lives, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. We had finally achieved our goal, the piece of paper that supposedly signified we were adults. But we were walking out of those doors with a heavy, unspoken grief. There was a peculiar kind of violence in how quickly she packed her things. The day after graduation, while we were still trying to process the fact that we were no longer students, She was moving out with a frantic, desperate energy. She didn't look at us. She didn't say goodbye. She just moved in and out of her room, her clothes piled into suitcases that felt like they contained the remains of her personality. He was there, of course, hovering in the hallway, his presence a dark, looming shadow. He didn't speak to us, but his gaze was a weapon, cold and dismissive. He was the victor, and he knew it. He had successfully cleared the path, removing the people who might have challenged his narrative, leaving her with nothing but his shadow to walk in. As she dragged her final bag to the door, she stopped for a second, her hand on the frame. For a split second, I saw her eyes flick toward me. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of profound, terrifying indoctrination. It was as if she were looking at a stranger, someone she had been told was an agent of the worldly darkness she was fleeing. She didn't say a word. She just walked out into the heat of the afternoon, and the door clicked shut behind her, sealing that chapter of our lives with a finality that made my chest ache. In the weeks that followed, the silence in the apartment was a relief, but also a haunting. We'd sit in the living room, no longer having to whisper, no longer having to check if he was pacing the halls. And yet, the absence of our friend felt like a phantom limb. We started to talk about the what-ifs. What if we had been more patient? What if we had let him stay just to keep the peace? What if we had just paid the $500 and gone to Costa Rica, even if it meant starving for a month? But then, one of my roommates, Sarah, found a notebook under the couch. It was one of the journals she used to keep. She had left it behind, maybe by mistake, or maybe it was a final, desperate plea for someone to understand. We opened it, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to know if she was still in there. The entries were chilling. They weren't her thoughts anymore. They were transcriptions of his rules, lists of sins she had committed by being our friend, and prayers he had forced her to recite. It was a manual on how to erase herself. Reading those pages, the guilt we'd been carrying evaporated. We hadn't lost her to a man. We had lost her to a total, systematic dismantling of her soul. We realized then that there was no saving her, because he had made sure that to be saved by us meant losing him, and he had convinced her that losing him was the equivalent of losing her connection to the divine. The realization was a jagged, painful pill to swallow, but it was necessary. We finally understood that we weren't the villains in her story. We were the only ones who had tried to offer her a reflection of the person she actually was. We couldn't hold on to that reflection for her. She had to choose to look at it herself. Now, as I'm writing this, months later, I'm in a new city. I have a job, I have my own space, and I have friends who respect my boundaries, who don't demand I sacrifice my stability for their whims, and who certainly don't ask me to choose between them and my own accomplishments. I still think about her sometimes. I wonder if she ever sleeps in a bed again, or if she's still on the floor. I wonder if she ever realizes that the holy union she signed up for was just a cage designed to keep her small, obedient, and entirely his. I've come to realize that some people will choose the comfort of a golden cage over the uncertainty of freedom, and that's a tragedy you can't fix from the outside. The lessons I learned in those final months of college about the importance of saying no, about the necessity of protecting your own sanity, and about the fact that sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone is to let them go, have become the bedrock of who I am today. It's easy to look back and wonder if you would have handled it differently. But when you're in the middle of it, when your home is being colonized and your friendship is being gaslit, you don't have the luxury of hindsight. You only have your gut instinct, and for the first time in my life, I listened to mine. I stood up for myself. And that, I've decided, is worth more than any peace I could have bought by compromising my integrity. Before I close this out, I want to ask you, have you ever had to walk away from a friendship because you realized the person was no longer the one you knew? How do you balance the loyalty you owe to a history with someone against the damage they're doing to your present? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because if this story taught me anything, it's that we are all navigating these invisible boundaries every single day. If you've ever felt like your space, your money, or your identity was being squeezed by someone you trusted, please remember that it is okay to draw the line. It is okay to prioritize your own life. And if you found value in this story, consider subscribing to the channel. We talk about these real, raw human experiences because sometimes just knowing you aren't the only one who has had to say no is the first step toward finding your own voice again. The chapter is closed. The move is done. And for the first time in a long time, the air feels clear.